Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show that pulls out the key bits of knowledge to keep you informed. You know that feeling, right? Staring at a blank screen, maybe a new dashboard or a complicated e-commerce page, or even just a blog layout with lots of images. And you need it to look great, be responsive, but you feel like you're, I don't know, wrestling an octopus made of CSS.
Oh, definitely. Each tentacle pulling a different way.
Exactly. Well, today we're going to try and cut through some of that struggle. We're diving deep into a combination that a lot of modern web developers really swear by. CSS Grid, but supercharged with Tailwind CSS.
A powerful combo.
Our mission today is pretty clear. We want you to walk away understanding not just what these tools are, but really how they work together, how they simplify making these sophisticated, pixel-perfect layouts.
Yeah, turning those tricky design challenges into something, well, surprisingly more straightforward.
Think of this as your shortcut, your way to get up to speed on a really key skill in modern web development.
Precisely. And a lot of what we're drawing on today comes from Codner Murphy's guide, Tailwind CSS Grid, Complete Guide and Examples. It's a great resource. What's really interesting in Murphy's take is how he points out that the big deal isn't just what Grid can do on its own,
Right.
but how Tailwind's whole utility-first approach just streamlines the process of using it. It's about letting developers move faster, with more confidence.
And hopefully, by the end of this deep dive, you, listening in, will have a really clear, practical understanding how to define grids, manage them, control them precisely using Tailwind. We're talking about getting that confidence to tackle pretty much any layout challenge, no matter how complex it looks. Maybe let's imagine we're building something specific throughout this chat, like a modern dashboard.
Good idea. Like, picture a layout with maybe a sidebar on the left,
Yeah, fixed sidebar.
a main area for charts and stuff, and maybe some smaller info cards scattered around.
Perfect. Okay, so where do we start? The absolute foundation.
Yeah.
Defining the grid container itself.
Exactly. So CSS Grid, fundamentally, it's this powerful canvas. Unlike Flexbox, which is more, one-dimensional.
Right, rows or columns.
Grid gives you true two-dimensional control. You define columns and rows together. That's often called the most powerful and flexible CSS layout tool available today for a reason.
It lets you think more like a designer, defining actual areas and how they relate, not just stacking boxes vertically or horizontally.
And this is where Tailwind comes in and just makes it faster. Instead of writing out display.grid, then grid template columns, and all that in separate CSS.
Yeah, switching files, losing context.
Tailwind gives you these concise utility classes, and it's not just about typing less, it's about staying right there in your HTML. You can prototype, tweak complex designs really quickly without that mental jump between files.
That's a huge plus for just like developer flow and speed.
It really is. So the very first step, as Muffy points out, is always setting up that main grid container. That's the box that holds everything else. It's basically telling the browser, okay, everything inside this element is going to follow grid rules.
So for our dashboard example, the main wrapper around the whole thing, that'd be our grid container. And with Tailwind, setting this up is, well, pretty simple. You mostly use the grid class. That makes a block-level grid element perfect for major layout chunks like our dashboard shell.
There is inline-grid, too, if you need a grid that flows like text.
Right, which is pretty rare for main layouts, I guess.
Yeah, quite rare. For almost everything layout-wise, grid is your starting point.
Okay, so connecting this back to our dashboard idea, this isn't just a technical detail. This is like drawing the first lines on the blueprint for the whole app structure.
Exactly. You're setting up how you'll organize the charts, the navigation, the data points. It sets the stage for a really organized, flexible UI later on.
Got it. So we've defined our container with grid. Now, by default, anything we put inside just stacks up vertically, right? Takes up the full width.
Yep, that's the default. Not quite the multi-column dashboard we're aiming for.
So how do we actually make it a grid? We need columns.
And that's where Tailwind's grid colsx classes are essential. You just declare how many columns you want. So for our dashboard, we wanted that fixed sidebar and a flexible main area. We could actually use something like gridcols 200p by 1fr. That gives a 200 pixel column and one that takes the rest of the space.
Oh, nice. Or for a simpler, even layout, like say 4 equal columns for some cards.
Then you just use gridcols 4. Creates 4 equal width columns. Super easy.
And the items inside our charts, our cards, they just automatically flow into these columns based on the HTML order.
That's right. Each item takes up 1 column slot by default. It's really intuitive for straightforward layouts where everything's roughly the same size.
But dashboards, like most real websites, usually need things arranged more specifically, don't they?
Absolutely. The automatic flow is great, but what if that main chart area needs to span across, say, 2 or 3 of those 4 columns?
Or you want a tiny little summary card tucked away in a specific spot.
Exactly. Modern UIs demand that kind of precise control. Automatic flow only gets you so far.
Okay, so this is where we need those more advanced column control classes, the ones you apply to individual grid items.
You got it. So let's say you want that big data visualization to start specifically in the second column. You'd add col-start 2 right onto that element.
And if it needs to be wider, stretching across 2 columns.
Then you add col-span 2 as well. And if you need absolute precision on where it ends, there's tol-index 2, though col-span is often more intuitive.
This lets you break out of that default stacking and really create a visual hierarchy, makes things stand out.
Think about our dashboard again, that main hero chart. It's not going to fit neatly in one small column. You'd probably give it col-span 3, or maybe even col-span full if it's really important. Makes it dominate the view.
Right, draws the user's eye.
Meanwhile, maybe a little notification widget. You could use col-start 4 to put it precisely in the top right corner. These tools give you that power to arrange complex pieces exactly where the design needs them.
Fantastic. So, horizontal control sorted. What about the vertical dimension, rows?
Very similar concept. Just like columns, you can define the number of rows explicitly using grid rows X classes on the container.
So if we wanted, say, 3 distinct horizontal sections in our main dashboard area, we could use grid rows 3.
Exactly. That sets up 3 explicit row tracks, and there's a bit of nuance here between implicit and explicit rows. If you just keep adding items to a single column grid, new rows get created automatically implicitly.
Okay.
And even if you define, say, grid rows 3, but you actually have 5 items, the grid will still create enough rows implicitly to hold all 5. It won't break anything.
But using grid rows X gives you that deliberate upfront control over the intended vertical structure. But again, what about those times you need more detailed vertical control? Like maybe an important metric card needs to span 2 rows of related data.
Or a user profile widget needs to line up perfectly across multiple sections vertically.
Yeah. Does Tailwind have classes for that too?
It does, mirroring the column controls exactly. For individual items, you use row start dex to define which row track it begins on,
Okay.
row span x to dictate how many rows it should cover vertically,
Makes sense.
and row index to specify the row line where it finishes.
So full control vertically as well.
Comprehensive control over that vertical flow. So for our dashboard example, that sidebar navigation, it probably needs to stretch the full height, right?
Yeah, typically.
You might give that sidebar element row span full to make it span all available rows automatically.
Oh, cool.
Or maybe a really tall component, like a detailed activity log, could use row span 3 to take up a significant vertical chunk. It just ensures every piece fits exactly where you want it, vertically and horizontally. Crucial for getting those balanced, organized layouts.
Right, so we've placed our dashboard bits using columns and rows. Now, something super important for any UI that looks good: spacing.
Absolutely critical.
Without good spacing, even the best grid structure can look cramped, hard to read, just messy.
It's the unsung hero, really. The source material really emphasizes how crucial spacing is for readability, visual appeal, and luckily, Tailwind makes managing this super easy with its gap utility.
Right, the main gap class, that's the one for setting uniform space between all grid items, both horizontally and vertically at the same time.
Exactly. So if you put gap 6 on our main dashboard grid container, boom, every component instantly gets, 1.5 rem of space around it? It makes it feel much more open, professional.
Instantly better. But what if you need different spacing horizontally versus vertically, like more space between the sidebar and main content than between rows of cards?
Yep, you can control axes individually. Gap X value handles the horizontal space between columns. So maybe gap X8 to really separate that sidebar. And gap E value handles the vertical space between rows. Maybe gap E4 for a slightly tighter stack of cards vertically. That flexibility is key for fine-tuning.
It's like thinking about the white space on a well-designed poster or magazine page. It's not empty, it's design space guiding your eye.
Exactly. The gap classes let you design that essential breathing room right into your grid structure. Makes the whole thing much easier to scan and use. Foundational for a polished feel.
Okay, so we've got structure, we've got spacing. Now let's talk alignment. This is where things get really polished, right? Getting things lined up just so.
This is definitely finessing the details. Tailwind gives you a whole set of classes for controlling alignment, both for the grid content overall and for individual items within their grid cells. We're talking about classes based on justify items and justify self for horizontal alignment,
Okay,
items and self for vertical alignment,
got it.
and then content and justify for aligning the entire grid track, like all the rows or columns together.
Whoa, okay, let's break those down a bit. They sound similar. First, horizontal alignment of items inside their grid cells.
Right. For that, you primarily use justify items on the grid container itself. This sets the default horizontal position for all items within their allocated slots.
So if we put justify item center on our main dashboard container,
Then every card would automatically center itself horizontally within its grid cell.
okay. But what if one specific item needs different alignment, like a button that should be pushed to the right?
That's where justify self comes in. You apply this directly to the individual grid item. So justify self end on that specific button would push just that button to the far right of its cell, overriding the container's justify item center.
Ah, overrides. Got it, per item control.
Exactly. Then for vertical alignment, it's a similar pattern. You use items, which is Tailwind's version of align item on the grid container.
And that controls the default vertical alignment for all items within their cells.
Correct. So item centers everything vertically in its slot. Items end pushes everything to the bottom of its slot, and so on.
And the override for a single item vertically.
That's self, corresponding to align self. Again, apply it directly to the item. Self-start would pull just that one item to the top of its cell, even if the container default is item center.
Okay, that makes sense. Items within cells, horizontal and vertical, container defaults, and individual overrides. What about the content and justify ones you mentioned? They sounded different.
They are slightly different. They deal with aligning the entire group of grid rows or columns within the container, especially if the grid itself doesn't fill all the available space.
Ah, okay. So content, that's for the rows.
Right. Content corresponds to align content. It positions all the grid rows collectively. Imagine your rows only take up half the container's height. Content Center would move that entire block of rows to the vertical middle of the container.
Instead of just centering items within the rows, it centers the whole set of rows.
Exactly. And Justify, which is justify content, does the same thing, but for the columns.
So if my columns don't fill the full width,
You could use justify center to center the whole block of columns, or justify between to push the first column to the left edge, the last to the right edge, and space the others out evenly between them. It distributes the entire track of columns.
wow, okay. That's a lot of control. This is really where you get that professional polish, making sure everything lines up perfectly, looks balanced, and adapts well.
Absolutely. These alignment tools are crucial for that final level of visual refinement and making sure the layout feels just right, especially across different screen sizes.
Understanding the theory is great, but seeing it used helps so much.
Yeah.
Does the source material give some practical examples?
It does, and they're really helpful for connecting the dots. It shows things like a typical blog post grid.
Like you see everywhere. 2 columns, maybe?
Exactly. Maybe grid cols to gap 6 on the container.
Hmm.
But then maybe the first article is featured and needs to span both columns at the top.
How would you do that?
Simple. On just that first article's element, you'd add col-span full or col-span 2. Instantly creates that wider magazine-style hero section. It shows how you use the item-specific classes to break the default grid flow strategically.
Creates that visual importance.
Nice. Or it shows a more complex website layout, like a header spanning all columns, col-span full, a sidebar running down the full height, row span full, and the main content filling the rest.
So the kind of layouts we actually build all the time.
Exactly. These aren't just abstract ideas, they're the building blocks for real-world interfaces, including the dashboard we've been imagining. Tailwind Grid just makes putting them together much more manageable.
And to help with that, especially when you're learning or just need a quick reminder, the source has a cheat sheet.
Yeah, and it's incredibly useful. Think of it like a quick reference guide.
What's on it?
It lists the standard CSS grid properties,
Right.
so, display, grid template columns, gap, align items, justify content, all the core ones. And then, crucially, right next to each one, it shows the common Tailwind class, or classes that achieve the same thing, plus a quick note on what it does.
Oh, that is handy, like a translator between standard CSS Grid and Tailwind's utilities.
Exactly that. So if you know the CSS concept, you can instantly find the Tailwind class you need. It really speeds things up, especially when you're starting out or just need to quickly look something up mid-flow. Helps you internalize the patterns much faster.
That sounds like a really valuable resource to keep nearby.
Definitely.
Well, this has been quite the deep dive. We've gone from setting up the basic grid container for our dashboard
I'm here with the foundation.
to managing columns and rows for placing components, adding that crucial spacing with gap, and then really fine-tuning everything with all those alignment options.
Yeah, covering the whole workflow.
And it really feels like this combination of CSS Grid's power and Tailwind's utility-first approach makes building these complex, responsive layouts much, much easier.
It genuinely does. Stepping back, mastering these tools gives you a huge boost in control and efficiency in web development. It helps you move past just fighting with layout quirks and lets you actually craft them more intentionally. You can iterate faster, respond to design changes more easily.
It improves the whole developer experience, letting you focus more on the interesting problems, maybe.
I think so. Less time fighting syntax, more time building cool stuff.
So, for you listening, here's something to think about. Picture a complex web app you use or admire. Maybe it's a project management tool, a cool portfolio site, or even that dashboard we talked about. Try to mentally break it down. How might its different parts, the sidebar, the content areas, the cards, the header be put together using the Tailwind grid ideas we covered today?
It's a great way to solidify the concepts and start seeing layouts differently.
And remember, this deep dive is really just scratching the surface.
Definitely. The official Tailwind CSS documentation is fantastic. Tons more options, examples, really comprehensive. And I'd also really encourage exploring how CSS Grid compares to Flexbox. They're both layout tools, but they excel at different things. Grid for two-dimensional layouts, Flexbox often better for distributing items along a single axis.
Right, knowing both gives you an even better toolkit.
Absolutely. You learn to pick the best tool for the specific job.
Well, hopefully you feel a bit more empowered now. Ready to tackle those web layouts, however complex, with more confidence and creativity, know you've got tools like Tailwind CSS Grid ready to go.
Yeah, go build something cool.
That's all for this deep dive. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.